screen, right, Brian? Good
All
afternoon,
right, good
folks.
to go.
All right, thanks, Brian. Good afternoon, folks. This is David Wethington, PA HMIS System Administrator for the Balanced State Continuum of Cares, as well as several other funded agencies using the Pennsylvania Homeless Management Information System. I'll be your host today during the webinar to basically go over the data entry exit annual assessment, tools, features, how to perform these functions, how to review these functions, and so on and so forth. Brian Miller will be manning the chat box, where you can find that. If you're viewing the screen directly, you can find it either to the right-hand side of your screen or at the top of your screen. You'll notice a little blue icon that you can hover up at the top of your screen. It might probably be faded out as you're seeing me move my mouse around up here, but if you hold it up there, it'll drop down, and you'll be able to select the chat function where you can go back and forth and ask questions about the presentation or questions that you might have. You can also have the ability to open up the participants to use the raise your hand feature during any time in the call, primarily during the end of the call or maybe between each section, depending on how much is covered, where we can open up the line and or attempt to open up your lines and have you answer your question live. So just as you see, just to get started, I just wanted to briefly show you a couple of the things with the PennsylvaniaCOC.org website /PAHMIS. As you see, there's a menu option that you can click on, and it'll take you directly to where you can find a lot of our publications and document library, where you have your general policies and your agreements, your intake templates in these different accordions, as well as any reporting guides, coordinated entry materials. And then you'll notice down here at the bottom, you'll have your client track version 15 is where that's going to be your most up-to-date trainings and recordings, where you'd find your general data entry procedures, your coordinated entry trainings, and so on and so forth. You can also do a couple other things. You can go directly to the HUD website where you can find materials in HMIS and other sources. You can also log directly onto the PAHMIS website by clicking the icon, and then it'll open up that tab, as well as requesting a PAHMIS account or requesting or adding organizations or projects when new projects come about through a funding source and so on and so forth. As well as the new SAGE HMIS reporting repository. We won't go into any detail about SAGE, and we probably most likely will do a separate one so that you guys understand that a little bit better in the near future. But to go directly into the system, I'm going to be using the training site today, so all data in the system is all test data, and any records that I create or maybe projects I select will not have their data affected by adding anything today. But there is a training environment along with the production environment. As you notice, the training environment, if you're bringing on new employees, it's the www.contract.net/PAHMIS_train, and the username and password most likely will be your username for the production site, and it's going to be your most recent password. Now, if you just had an account that was created, most likely it'll be the temporary password, and then you'll have to reset it from there. So I'm going to go ahead and log into the system. And when you first log in, obviously you'll notice there's three icons: work group, organization, and location. Work group varies. Primarily, what I'm going to be working in today is strictly the PAHMIS programs work group for case managers, which is your baseline work group from your general data entry. When it comes specifically to coordinated entry work, you want to focus on either your Eastern or your Western continuum of care, as well as any path work and so on and so forth, and ESG invoicing as well. So but you'll have there's separate trainings available on the PA HMIS website that you can go to and take if you have not already reviewed those, as well as guides you can review as well. So what I'll do is I'm going to make sure I'm on the proper work group. The organization, most people will only have one organization, but if you are a person that does do work for multiple organizations, which is few, but it does exist, you want to make sure that you are on the appropriate organization for you. And then location, doesn't matter. A lot of people say, well, what do I put in for location? Really, the location is based off of the your different program locations within your organization. It doesn't matter what you're doing in regards to that. So whatever the default is, you can just use that and leave that alone. Then you want to use these settings. Sometimes it'll pop open a new window to where you'll see it, the database open up. Other times you'll get an icon back on the same tab. I'm actually going to minimize that for a second. You'll get a little warning up here that says open up in a new window. You'll click that, and it'll open up a new window. What we've noticed sometimes is since the update to the overall servers, we have had times and instances where people will log in on this screen and the database will open up in the same tab. If you notice that happen, first thing you want to do is you want to make sure you hit the refresh button, refresh it, and log back in so that it will open up a new window. For some reason, Clientrack's working on that, and they are aware of that occurring at some times, but if you were to leave that tab open, it will not open up anything else moving forward, nor will it allow you to save a lot of your information. So a lot of times people will say, well, I know I entered this in here, but they go back in to check their records, and it's not there. Most likely it's because of that timeout or that server error, which we are aware of, Clientrack is aware of, and it's just the server issue that we want to make sure that you remember that it does not open up in this tab right here exactly. So getting into the system, you'll notice, as always, the first time when you log in and anytime after that, it'll always open up in the client workspace. But what I first want to show you is the different workspaces, and when a lot of times if you were to call the help desk or call myself or Brian directly, we'll always refer to, well, what workspace are you in, or we'll refer you to a specific workplace. And how to get to those workplaces is you'll notice up here there's a Clientrack logo, and to the right of that you'll have this blue icon that turns orange if you hover over it. Excuse me. And if you click on it, it'll open up your carousel. And the carousel has your different workspaces. Before these workspaces in the old system, they were tabs at the top, where Clientrack is now going to more of a carousel approach. And you'll have your home workspace, your client workspace, your provider workspace, housing workspace, and support workspace. Just to show you a little bit, tell you a little bit about each one of these. So the home workspace is primarily where you're going to access your reports, your case management tools, and any system documentation that you're looking for in the system. The client workspace specifically is where you're going to do your coordinated entry intake procedures, as well as your general data entry when you're dealing with putting direct client data into the system. And then your provider workspace, that's going to be for specifically, depending on your COC, how you're utilizing coordinated entry and your referral process. So that's where you would manage your referrals, where you're accepting referrals from coordinated entry and so on and so forth. This is primarily on the Eastern COC, but I just wanted to let you know of that. And then the housing workspace, and the provider workspace is also where you would manage your either community queue or prioritization list for coordinated entry. And I'll get into that a little bit later in the training. And then the housing workspace, that's where you're going to have the ability to manage your housing or voucher inventory. We are in the process of putting together a separate training to go over how to manage that. There are guides that already exist on the PA-HMIS website, as well as in the system under system documentation, to allow you to be able to manage your bed inventory appropriately and pull reports based off of your housing inventory chart and so on and so forth. And then support is when you submit a ticket directly in the system by selecting that help button wherever you're at in the system, wherever an error occurs or reporting an issue, and that's where you're able to go in and manage that and see where your support tickets are in the process. So going direct, let's start off with the home workspace. And of course, you notice the first thing is a very large screen. And a lot of people, when they log on for the first time, they get scared and they're like, oh, well, I don't see anything. Where's my menu? So you always want to make sure your menu option, your menu button is going to be in this top left-hand corner. It's going to be that grayish white square with 3 slashes. And then if you hover over it, it'll say show your menu. To open it, you'll click on it. What I normally like to do, depending on where I'm working in the system, and for this purpose, I'll go ahead and use this push pin right here, which will, if the pin is pointed to the left, it is going to hide the menu or collapse the menu when you click off of it or click out of the menu. If it's pointing down, then it will lock it in and it will not collapse when you move off the page. Excuse me. The next thing I wanted to show
you. Dave?
Yes?
Hey, Dave, I just want to mention, and I don't know if there's anything that can be done about volume or everything, there are some people that are saying they're having a hard time hearing you.
Okay.
I don't know if there's any way to speak a little louder or a little closer to the mic, but I just wanted to mention that.
Okay. I apologize. I'm using this new headset, and hopefully I'll try to move the mic a little bit closer. Is this a little bit better?
I think so. You're a little louder. Yeah.
Okay.
It's better.
Okay. Thanks. So in your home workspace, what it first loads obviously is your user dashboard, and that's going to show you anything from agency news that you could post, as well as your current program enrollments, where it's going to list all the programs within your organization, and it's going to show you the cases, which means households, meaning families with children or single individuals, where groups them together, or total clients, which is going to show you all the clients, including the children or the dependents within the household, as well as single individuals. And that comes up on your client dashboard, as well as your case assignments. So all the cases that you've worked on or currently have open, you can go in and edit directly or select the client from there, and so on and so forth. So working down the menu options, just to show you this recent button. This recent button right here is going to, if clicked on, it's going to show you your most recent clients that you've worked on within the system. From your clients to the work you've done on the provider workspace, as well as the work you've done on the home workspace. So it breaks it out between the workspaces, the most recent work that you've done. And you can go directly into the client just by clicking on them and moving forward. But I'm not going to click anything here because I want to continue showing you what's on the home workspace. The next one, so I want to show you this because a lot of people don't utilize this favorite functionality, but it is there. I'm going to remove this just for a second to show you. In this section is your whole favorites area. And as you see, I had system documents up there, and I had that set as a favorite because this is where you can go and directly find agreements, policy, procedures, system feature guides, training and referral guides, intake templates, or just your general system information. Which is primarily and obviously needs to be updated to the most recent version, which will be updated very shortly. But again, this is the training site, so the production site should have all updated information as it stands. So to set this as a favorite or move that into that section, once you click on it and open it, you'll notice that there's these star buttons where it says add to favorite if hovered. Once you click on it, it'll actually come up and say, oh, well, where do you want to store this? You can either store it directly up there like I had it, or you can create a folder or a container that says, I'll just call this System Docs. And what I'll do is I'll click on it, it saves a folder, and then save. And then I'll click Save, and you'll notice that now it's in my favorites, and it takes me directly there. I did the same thing for a couple client management tools and reporting features. But to get to those, you'll go to your you have your case management reports option, which you would find your HUD HMIS reports, meaning your HUD APR or ESG CAPER or your CFC APRs and so on and so forth, as well as some of your AHAR reports, your PATH reports, SSVF reports, and so on and so forth. Since I didn't have that, I'll show you exactly how to save this as a favorite. I would go ahead and click on the APR for CFC Funded Projects. I would click on the star, and then if I unclick the star, it would remove it. But I'm not going to unclick it because I want to keep it there, and you'll notice that if hovered, it appears right there, and then it'll come up. And of course, we are going to do a separate report training webinar later this month to go over exactly what reports and how to run reports and which reports you should be looking at and so on and so forth. But this one's just going to make sure that you're doing the correct procedures when doing your data entry, your exits, and your annual assessments. And then another cool little feature are your client management tools, which again I have up here. But the one that I like to use is obviously your active enrollment cases or clients. I'm going to actually save the active enrollment cases here so I can show you how this works. So this is obviously going to show me all families with children and single individuals within any specific program that I select. So if I were to select this HMIS Service Transitional Housing Program, it'll show me all of the case ID numbers associated to those households and then how many household members. You can actually see or view the case members by clicking on the two individuals, and you'll see who these individuals were and so on and so forth. Same thing, if I wanted to actually select a household, I can select a household, and it will load the head of household for this case and take me directly to the client workspace. And the same thing were to happen if you were to use the active enrollments. Another feature here is your in-permanent housing unit for permanent housing project. This is going to be your rapid rehousing, your permanent or your permanent supportive housing, or any permanent housing program that you operate. You can go into here and looking at all your active clients, you can select the project that you're looking to it to apply to, and then where all of the permanent housing units that say no, it'll pull those up as a quick little and it'll show you exactly what's going on. So obviously all of them were placed in the permanent housing program, so I'm going to go ahead and show you the rapid housing where it said it'll list the case that had a household, where it needs to be answered, and then you could do a quick answer here, and it'll update the record from there instead of actually having to go directly into the system or into the actual client record and going through that process. And then the next feature is your homeless status documentation. As of right now, the only program or project that requires this is your ESG funded programs through DCED funded ESG funding, where you would select the grant that's associated to that. I'm just going to, excuse me. So you'll select the grant, and then you'll select the project or program that it's associated to, and then it'll tell you what documentation has been uploaded and what has not been uploaded, where you can then view and upload the appropriate documentation, whether it's third-party intake worker observation, certification from a person's, or the self-cert, where you're able to upload the checklist as well as the documentation, as well as view any homeless documentation history with that record and any other projects where the information is shared. Again, the information must be shared at each organization and the client must consent to that sharing of information in order for the records to be seen between two different organizations. And then the next one I'm going to share because it's important because both of the veterans subcommittees or committees of the Eastern CFC are working very hard to identify where veterans are and whether they've been placed or not. And what we've done to kind of help this process a little bit more is each work off of what's called a veterans master list. And instead of sending out each individual master list per agency, we've created an actual tool within the system for agencies that are serving veterans to go into, which is called the Veterans List by Agency, and then they were able to pull up the CFC that they're associated with. Obviously, if you're associated, your organization is associated with more than one CFC, then you'll have to go into each individual one, but you want to select the CFC that you're a part of, and then it'll bring up your veterans that you're serving, and you'll update the list status. For more information on this, when it comes to the reporting, I'll go into a little bit more detail, and we can send out the information related to that if you are serving veterans. So, Brian, before we go on to the next section, to the client workspace, do we have any questions we want to ask or answer live?
Yeah, let me see.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking. And we're going to cover the consent for sharing. Are we going to do that during the entry?
Yeah, we'll do that during the entry. Mm-hmm. Gotcha,
because that'll wait. Because someone asked, is client consent for sharing mandatory for coordinated entry?
Mm-hmm. So that's going to be within your CFC's policies and procedure manual. That'll tell you exactly what client consent or implied consent, depending on what type of provider you are, whether you're a call center or an access site, will depend on which one is required at the time of entry or that intake process. But we'll do that in the next workspace area. So moving on.
Yeah, that's it.
That's it? Okay. So moving on to the next workspace, again, coming up here to this blue arrow. Obviously, when the menu is expanded, it's just a blue icon with the two white arrows. You go ahead and select that and click on Client Workspace. And what it's going to do, obviously, remember I loaded that last client. So it's loading. We're going to show you the very last client that you worked with in the system. So this is actually not the client I want to work with, but to show you how to find a client, obviously, or move on to the next client, is you want to make sure you come up here to Find Add Client. And you want to put in the client's information. Oops. And you can, so the more information you put in, the more exact it's going to come down to. And it's not always recommended you put every last detail in here, only because you might be so exact, but there might be a record here that's not quite exact, and you want to just go in and verify to make sure that you're not duplicating a record. So I like to put in some abbreviated versions of the name and then search on the client. Luckily enough, there's only one Johnny Manziel in the system or the training environment, so he came up. But if there were others, you would want to if there were 2 or 3 or 4, you'd want to verify the last 4 of the social is the same, as well as the date of birth and any other information that's available. You'll notice here too, owned by your organization. That means you own that record and you've imported that data. Now, for some reason, if you notice that there are multiple records in the system, there is the ability to merge a client. It can be confusing sometimes, and if you're not a case manager, you don't have the ability, and if you're only a case manager or have access to the case manager work group, you don't have the ability to merge the record. You actually have to go to a person in your organization that is an agency manager that can perform that. So if your agency manager is not available or unaware, you can always email the help desk for a duplicate record, and we can take care of that for you in the merger records. So I'm going to go ahead and click right on Johnny Manziel here to load his record. Knocking on wood that it doesn't move as slow as it sometimes does. And you'll notice the first thing it's going to do is load its load his client dashboard. So within the client dashboard, you'll see your client identification information, your client profile information, as well as any enrollments associated to this record. And sometimes you might catch a client photo depending on if the organization uploads pictures, as well as any services that have been provided for this individual. So under the client identification, you have your history of homelessness, which I showed you a little bit before, but you can actually go in here, and if the information obviously is shared, it will pull a report to show you all of the project types and providers or organizations or programs that they were enrolled in, and whether or not the enrollment is open, and then how long they actually stayed there. And this is very helpful and useful for helping determine episodes of homelessness throughout the system that have been recorded, and so on and so forth. And you do have the ability to download this as a PDF and print it out, and so on and so forth. You have your client summary report, which will give you a quick summary of the excuse me, of the client information. And again, this is the training site or the training environment, so not all things will might be up to date, but they are working in the production site. And then you have this cool little navigate me to, which kind of will take you to different areas of the client record, and it's kind of like a quick feature. Like I want to just go to the project enrollments, or I just want to open up the assessments, or so on and so forth. But I also do want to show you, once it loads, there you go, what you can click on and what you can load to update the information or add enrollments or assessments or so on and so forth. So I'm going to close this workflow because I don't want this open, because I don't want to go in there directly. I made a mistake. But I will open up the menu for the client workspace, because what I want to show you is, again, in this favorite section, I put up here the most things that I use in the system. Obviously, that's going to be your project enrollments, and that's going to be your assessments. So what I did to make sure that that loaded is I clicked on project enrollments, and I saved that as a favorite. And again, it's that star feature that turns yellow. If it's white, that means it's not saved. And project enrollments will take you directly to that project of record and list all the enrollments associated and any case members in there as well. So I'm just going to go ahead and start an enrollment, a new enrollment for this individual, just to walk you through the entire process for when somebody comes in. So I found added the client. He was there. He appeared. I came down here to project enrollments. You can come directly down here to project enrollments. Through the process, you should go through the edit client profile, but I do want to show you, just in case you go directly down here. You can come here, and then what the workflow will do is it will pick up any information that is missing and throw it into the workflow. So by clicking on Add New Enrollment, the first thing that comes up in the workflow is whether or not you want to edit or view household members. So whether or not, so if, let's say, you're enrolling this client and he is actually coming in here with a certain number of members or by himself, you could, if he's coming in by himself, you could say no, continue with the enrollment. If not, if there are other household members, I would recommend going in directly saying edit the household, because you always want to make sure you verify that the household members coming in with the client are are all present there. And if they're not present there, like for example, if let's just say Janice Manzel is not there and coming along with the household, first thing you want to do is you want to edit the household member. But once it comes up, and it has come up now, you want to look at the information, and you'll notice that if you have a date of when they actually left the household, you want to put that date. But if it's, let's say it's, excuse me, I'm going to actually go a month back of when this, actually, you know what, I'm going to do this based off of today, because we want to make sure that all enrollments are done within a timely manner and within a if it's not as real-time as possible, at least 5 to 7 days, the information should be put into the system and updated, just to make sure that information is going in a timely manner and it's not counting against you with any type of ranking or reviewing and so on and so forth, and jeopardizing performance. So I'm going to we'll do January 1st of when they left the household, and I'll go ahead and click Save. And you notice once we click Save, it removes her from the household. And then I'm going to say that the rest of the household members came along. So all but, which you have 5 household members here associated to the record. You also want to go along here and make sure that the information is correct for each of the household members. And you can update this by just clicking on and changing that information and so on and so forth. As well as if there was any multiple races or you needed to change something or notice that there was a difference, you can just click on the name directly. Once we hit Save and Continue, once we verify the information, it'll then take us to the next section, which is your project or program enrollment, where you'll select the project that they're going into. So for this purpose, I'm going to go ahead and say that they're going to go into permanent supportive housing. And you'll notice, excuse me, that the next thing it wants you to do is it wants to carry over the household members that are associated too. And again, it wants you, by clicking on those people that are in there, it will come up and it's already set their relationship to head of household. And we want to I'm going to make sure not to select the Janice who is not in that household anymore. Oh, come on, come back down. As you notice, there was an error here, as Pauline cannot be, there can't be 2 head of households. It has to be one or the other. And there we go. So we want to make sure you select. So if there's not 2, we want to make sure that it's set appropriately. Okay, so as you notice, there are other alerts in the system for set up for projects or programs that have capacity concerns. So a lot of times it could be actually a strict alert, or it can just be a warning alert. A lot of times if you just click Save again, and it doesn't save, then there's a restriction there, and it's telling you and it's warning you that it's at capacity for the program. So to move things along, There we go. To move things along, I had to remove some people away from there. That's because I don't want to keep it moving along. But there has reached capacity, and for some reason there is, you actually are able to fit more people in a unit than what is originally assigned or set up for that project. Then you want to make sure you update the project capacity under the profile, the project profile, and that can be changed by emailing the help desk or emailing me directly, and we can make that change in the system. So moving along, the next one, once you get past the actual project enrollment section, you have your assessments, your entry assessments, and you want to make sure that the assessment date is associated directly with the date that is associated to the project enrollment date. A lot of times if the data is going in after the fact, and we had set that for, let's say we set it for 1/1, it'll say 1/3, but you want to make sure that it's correct to whatever the project enrollment date is, which can throw off a lot of data or your data reports at the time of pulling it into an APR or ESG caper or some type of data quality report. So now that I verified that, I'm going to go ahead and click Save. And what it's going to do is we're going to work. It's going to workflow is going to continue working through the entire process. First one is the universal data assessment. Again, always verify the date is correct. It should remain the same throughout the entire process if you're working and doing the data entry live. First one is housing status. So you want to select the most appropriate category that they fall into. Then whether or not the head of household, as you see, that's who we're working on first, has a disabling condition or not. And then is the client or household currently residing in a permanent housing unit? So this question right here, if you're working and providing case management or essential services to the individual and they have not physically moved into the unit, then you want to select no. If they have, then you want to select yes, and then provide the date. I'm going to select no, so that we can show you something later. Show you later what it would look like to go in and update. Next is the service location. Obviously, that's just the location of where you're providing the services out of. And then the zip code of last permanent address. That is a older data element that was used that we don't currently, is not required anymore, but if your CFC or RAB requires it for any type of point-in-time reporting or any other reporting because they want to know exactly where people are coming from, feel free to enter it in there. And then you have the type of residence, which is under your living situation of where they actually were. Next one, once you select a specific living type of residence, it will populate the next set of questions, which is the length of stay prior to their living situation, meaning how long they were there. And then the approximate date homelessness started. So this isn't technically the date that they, enrolled into that shelter. It can be a date that if you have the documentation and the verification of where their homelessness started, then you would put that date in of the first occurrence that they might have, or so on and so forth. You know what? Let's do January 1st, 2016. And then the next one is regardless of where they stayed last night, number of times the client has been on the street, in emergency shelter, or safe haven in the past 3 years, including today. And depending on what you answer here is what is depending on whether or not where they fall. But it has to be minimum. We want to make sure that you have that documentation to verify, depending on your funding stream, of where what needs to be selected. I'll do 3 times, and then total number of months homeless on the street, emergency shelter, safe around the past 3 years. So this is a total number. So if they were homeless 3 times, for each of those 3 times, how many months total were they homeless? So for this purpose, I'm going to say more than 12 months. And then you have this default from last assessment for the insurance assessment, which will carry over if the information previously exists. For this purpose, I'll go ahead and say yes. We'll go ahead and say Medicaid, and then we will say save. And then the next one is the health barriers assessment. Again, check the date, and then you want to put in here what the disability is that they have, if they have one. I believe I said yes, so I will go ahead and select. And then once you select that, it'll say you'll have save, and then you'll move on to the next section. A lot of times, if the person's already in here, I like to select the default last assessment to see if it carries over. If not, you can go ahead and say no. If it is yes, it'll ask you further questions and say when the situation occurred, and then currently fleeing DV situation. So I'll say no for this purpose. And then move on to the next assessment. Again, you can either hit default last assessment, or what you see it loaded, or you can pull up the very last assessment that was done, which for this purpose, it was done on 3/3/2017 under the Coordinated Entry Program. But if you do know, and they do have income, you could say yes. And then what you'll want to do is you will want to, 1, select what it is that they have, and put the dollar amount. And you would do the same thing for non-cash benefits if they were receiving that as well. And for your own, it's not required, but if you would like to track this, you could track expenses, and you could put in exactly what expenses they have and what the amount is, and save that in the record, and then be able to pull that up later. Okay. And the next thing is whether or not they are employed, which is the employment assessment. No? Well, 1, if I answered yes, it's a type of employment, full, part-time, or seasonal, and then number of hours. If I say no, it'll say not employed reason, and looking for work, unable to work, not looking for work. I'll select unable to work. Again, this is not always required, this employment assessment. So if you don't collect this information, which it's helpful if you do, you want to put it in your save it. If not, you can always skip the assessment and move forward and come back to it at a later date. And then the next one is the adult education assessment. So you have your currently in school, or working on degree, yes or no, or client doesn't know, client refused. And then you have your questions. Obviously, anything with a red asterisk, I should have mentioned this previously, but most people already know, is a required question and will not allow you to move on to the next step. And then, if answered high school diploma, it'll ask about any secondary education. And you can select multiple ones here. selecting save. And I'll ask you one more time about the master project assessment, but it'll ask you, it'll move on to the next household member. So it'll say, hey, is the state correct? You'll say yes. You'll move on and do the workflow or do the assessments for those individuals and the household members as well. I'm going to speed through this as much as possible, as long as it loads. You can leave them as no. Again, it's the same questions going through. You're just making sure that the information is selected. And it is specific to whether or not they are over the age of 18 or under the age of 18, because it is tailored to the questions that are required for them to be answered. For this purpose, I'll go ahead and move the training along and skip these assessments. And we're now on one of the children. And as you notice, as a child, again, it's limited to the questions that need to be answered. Health insurance is one that is required, so you want to make sure that it gets selected, and disabling condition as well. And the health barriers assessment. And the education assessment. I do want to point out, because I did kind of go through, and you probably said, well, the restrictions down here, what are these restrictions, and why are we always sharing the transaction? So the only time that you would say do not share the transaction is during the client consent form. If the client did not consent to that information being shared, then you would select that as do not share on the client consent form. Ninth. No, that person is 7 years old. And then at the end, it'll ask you that it'll tell you you're done, and then you'll need to make sure you click Finish Close Workflow. Again, if this was a single individual, we would have got this after the first person, but since it was family, there were multiple people, and then it will get to the finish mark. If that is not selected, and for some reason you close out, most likely that information is not going to save, and then you'll probably be emailing the help desk and say, hey, my information didn't save. But we want to make sure that you always select that button, as well as you want to make sure prior to starting an enrollment that tab, that this server or database did not open up in the same tab as the login screen. Because if it did, and you go through that entire process and get to finish, it won't finish. And when you go to refresh, it won't save any of that information. So you want to make sure that again, that the system opens up in a brand new window. I did notice that because this guy was already owned by our organization, that the client consent did not come up. So with that in mind, and since it must have been a client consent that already exists, I will show you the client consent where that would be. So If not owned by your organization, most of the time what will happen is, and you know what, let's just do it. We'll do this just to show you. I will pull up John Smith and hope that there's a John Smith that is not owned by my organization, which is the second one. So it's John Smith not owned by organization, and we verified that the date of birth is correct. The first thing you want to do, obviously, is not owned, but it is a global client. You want to come up here to client identification, but I do want to show you if you were to try and say, hey, the project enrollment, everything's grayed out. How come this isn't working for me? Well, you want to come over here to your client identification first and click Review, Import Client, Global Client. And you'll notice the information. The information will populate if the information is in here. And you'll want to, but since there is very limited data on this client, it's going to just carry over the name and allow you to pull this record into your organization so that once you perform the client import. It'll ask you, oh, when do you want to import the data? Make sure you import the data when you get the client consent. And the client consent should match with the project enrollment date. If the client consent comes after the project enrollment date, all the data that you're entering under the entry will not carry over, will not be shared, and might screw up your reporting. So I'll go ahead and click the import, and I'll click finish. And now that this client is now owned by me, and I can go in and update the information accordingly, where you can go to your project enrollment, or I can go to my favorites, add a new one, and go through the process of enrolling the client. And you'll notice you'll get the client consent for release of information here, where you'll want to make sure you put in the date of the consent. It already pushes it 7 years out. You have the data sharing level, whether it's, if they say, yeah, go ahead, yes, I want my information shared so that I could, the services, I can get the appropriate services so that I can be permanently housed. You could say full. If they say, you know what, I'm not so sure. I don't want to share my gender or marital status or veteran status. You can even lock it down to specific enrollments or services, like I don't want to share my services, and go from there. And then you would say agreement signed, and then you have the option to upload the agreement as well. And then you would click save. Or you could say no. It'll move everything away. You'll still see agreement signed, and you still have the option to upload, and then you would click save. But for this purpose, I'll do full sharing, save, and then it'll take me through the process of the project enrollment, of the process I just went through, and so on and so forth. All right? Brian, before I go into annual assessments and exits, since that's not a long process, is there any questions that we should answer aloud?
There's only one that I've answered. Yeah, there's only one question. It was just, and it's a pretty straightforward one. In terms of income and benefits, some people had some questions about who should collect this information in terms of like the household members. And I basically just answered privately that income and benefits are collected by adults and head of households. So the system will only, for any children that are under 18, you're not even going to see the income and benefits screen for them. You just need to collect it for adults and heads of household. And then another question was like, well, what do we do with children income? Like if there's some child support or if some benefits are going directly to the child. The recommendation for that is, because you can't collect it for the child, is to add it to the head of household so that it does get included in the household income.
Correct. Yeah, the only other thing that I would add to that has come up in the past was, what if there's somebody who you have a family that's enrolled into a program, and the child coming in is 17, and then the information, then they turn 18 while they're still enrolled in the program, a month or two later. Do you have to collect the information as an adult? There's two options you can do. You could collect the information as they are an adult when they turn 18, or for that, if they still exist within that enrollment and they're receiving services under that same enrollment, their information is still rolled up into the head of household at that time, and then you don't have to do any additional information for that client. So that's that. All right. So
yeah, that's it.
Okay. So next thing I wanted to look over and review under this client workspace is, before I do the exit, we'll go ahead and do the annual assessment. So I reloaded Johnny Manziel. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to look for, we're going to use a rapid rehousing project. It looks like a good one is going to be this HMIS service, SSVF rapid rehousing, which has an exit date. Let's see if there's one that's... I know what I'll do. So here's one that comes up. Let's say, oops, I made a mistake on the actual enrollment date. What you can do is you can either use your dashboard here, or you can go to your project enrollments, and you can go into that actual enrollment, and that's where you can change the date of the enrollment. Let's do... The one other thing that you make sure you want to have to do if that happens, or if that occurs, is you will want to go and you also want to change their assessments as well for that date. So you want to edit master assessment and make sure that gets changed and updated as well. And you just want to verify and make sure that the assessment summary has carried over as well, which are the individual assessments, which you'll want to go in to each one of them and update it accordingly. So this is why you want to make sure that the information that you're creating is correct. All right. Let's just do the one more. All right, so traditionally, when it comes to annual assessments should be done for any project where clients are enrolled in that program for longer than 12 months. So that could be some transitional housing program. So once you, if someone has been enrolled for your program for over a year, you want to make sure that an annual assessment was done on their anniversary date. Same thing for this also is required for rapid rehousing programs, as well as permanent supportive housing or any other permanent housing project that you have. And it's going to be on the anniversary date. So the reason why I dated this back to January 3rd, 2017 is to show that, okay, the anniversary date came up. So technically, we know that you're not always able to get the actual information on the actual anniversary date. So HUD's given a 60-day window. So that's 30 days prior and 30 days after the actual, excuse me, the actual assessment. So what we've actually done, and before I show you that, I'm going to go back here to the home workspace, because what will help you with this is a little case manager report under client program reporting data quality reports, known as the annual assessment data check, where you will put in the date. I'm actually going to date this back to 2017. And the organization is already selected, so I'm going to select the project that I enrolled them in, which was the permanent supportive housing one, and I'm going to run this report. And what this report's going to show me is it's going to show me all the clients that were enrolled between the date ranges that I selected, and it's going to show you where, so their annual anniversary allowed range. So it'll tell you what the actual anniversary date is, and then the date range you have to do an annual assessment. If you try to create one outside of this range, it will come up as an error when you go to do your annual or your APR report, or any other reporting. It'll come up as an error and say that it failed in reporting, and you'll need to update that accordingly. So you want to make sure, so we're at the Manzels. So between 12/4/17 and 2/2/2018 is when their actual anniversary date, their annual assessment is due. And as you see, it failed because one does not exist. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to minimize this and come back over here to the home workspace. And as you notice, you can always, when you minimize a report, you can bring it back up to look at it and then minimize it again and then go from there. So I'm going to go to this actual blue action button or blue circle, and I'm going to come down here to these different options that we have here. So one, you'll see down here where it says perform update / annual assessment. You'll select that. You'll say you want to look at make sure the information is correct, case manager is still the same, and then the project start dates are still accurate and nothing changed there. You'll confirm that. And then it'll ask you whether or not you want to perform an annual or during enrollment assessment for this particular client, Johnny Manziel. So you'll say yes, and then you'll select annual assessment. And then this assessment date is going to be the date that you want to put in there, that you conducted the annual assessment. Oops, I forgot what the date ranger was again. Let me open up this report. That was hidden. Let's see. Okay, let's hide that back. We'll come up here. We'll say, I conducted this right before Christmas, so I'll say on the 21st of December. I'll go ahead and say save. And what it'll do is it'll bring up the information that is pertinent or required during the annual assessment process. So again, it's your health insurance, making sure, verifying that that information is still correct. Again, we should be able to select default last assessment, and then it should load in the while you're in the production site. You'll say yes, and then you'll put in the information, and then you'll click save. Let's say for some reason, no, we don't want to skip that. We're going to go to So this information was the same, didn't change. So I'm just going to verify what I wrote again. Chronic, yes. Mental, no. Mental, yes and no. No. I'll save. And then it'll want to ask you the income information. Go to where I saved that. And this is where you want to say, well, they got an increase, not $7,000. And we'll say, yeah, they still get food stamps, but they got an increase in Social Security, so we're dropping them down to $200. That's what they said. We'll say save. And let's see if this works. There we go. No and unable to work. Education. That didn't save, so we'll say save. And you want to make sure this information gets saved. And then it'll bring you on to the next household member. And you want to do the same thing. Well, that was no. Oh, that's right, I skipped this one. And let's say we did answer this one. We'll say save. And we can always, and we'll do this. And again, this is just your information that's required for children. And finish. And you'll notice here that so the project, you have the project start date, and then you'll also notice the last assessment date, which was 12/21/17, which is most likely going to be your annual assessment. So another thing besides the annual assessment that comes up here that we've added was the edit household move-in date to make that more accessible to that. Instead of using that client management tool, you can just come. Client management tool will tell you who needs it done, and you can do it right then and there. Whereas the edit house, when you're under actual record, you can go to the edit housing move-in date and edit it here, and whatever that date was. So we will say, let's say they moved in March 1st. And that updates that there. So the next section, and I'll cover this because it's short as well, is when they actually move out of the program. So we've gone over entries, we've gone over the housing move-in date, as well as annual assessments. So the next one is performing an exit. And this you'll want to put in the exit date. I'm actually gonna say, since we backdated the annual assessment, we'll say that they moved out today. And they were able to, where is it at? As you see, there's all these permanent destinations. You got your owned by client, no housing subsidy, owned with housing subsidy, rental by client, staying with family, permanent tenure, and then you have some of these other ones as well. And then you do down here at the bottom have your other, where this client doesn't know, client refused, data not collected, no exit interview completed, which you want to just stay away from as much as possible, because data not collected and no exit interview completed is known as information that is missing and could hurt your data quality and reporting on your annual reports, your AR, your CAPER, and so on and so forth. So for this client, I'm going to say no housing, no ongoing housing subsidy run by client. And I want to make sure, because I'm no longer working with them, I'll say end case management, case assignment. It'll ask me what the date was. You want to make sure that that date is correct. You'll click save, and then it'll take you through the exit assessments. As you see, it defaulted from the last assessment, which was the annual assessment. We'll say save. Oh, what happened? What did I select? Please enter. Oh, so just because it hit default, you also want to make sure, because you are saving this as an assessment, that this is highlighted as yellow. Now you can save. We'll use the default. Verify that that information is still the same. Click save. And if you're exiting that household, you want to also make sure you exit all of the dependent as well. Reason for leaving? I don't know if I selected that last time, but it's not required, but a lot of agencies like to use this as some of the reasons why a person left. A lot of times you might have some type of criminal activity or non-compliance with the program, or no non-payment, or something of that nature. For this purpose, we'll go ahead and say completed the program. You have your exit project assessment, and then it'll ask you those questions. And we'll do the same thing for the child. Oop, too fast. Remember to take your time as you're going through this, and making sure that you're not selecting things that are incorrect, so then you don't have to come back later and update the information. Again, we can just verify and view any previous data. And finish. do we have any questions or any hand raises about entries, exits, annual assessments, housing move-in dates?
Let me check. If there is a client who is not enrolled for over 12 months, do we use update assessment instead of annual assessment to update any changes?
Yeah, if they have not been enrolled for 12 months or more, then you would use the update assessment. So, yeah, because they're not. It's done based off of the anniversary date, and the requirement is that it's for clients that are in the program for longer than a year. And you'll notice that too. If you were to pull that annual assessment data check report, it'll say, for example, that client was. So this client was enrolled in September 24th, 2017, and their anniversary would have been November 24th, 2018. So it's not required for this reporting cycle, and won't be held against you if you were to pull an APR because there's no requirement of that. But if for some reason from the entry assessment the information has changed between, let's say the APR was due at the APR review period or reporting period ended 12/31/2017, and the information changed, you would want to make sure that it's the most accurate information in the system as possible. Anything else?
Yeah. Are signed client consent forms required to be scanned and uploaded into the system using HMIS?
Signed client consent forms are not required to be uploaded, but they are required to be at your organization for monitoring purposes. I could say it's recommended that you upload the release of information documentation form for better record keeping, but it's not required unless the COC or ESG administrators or board wants to require it.
Gotcha. This one has to do with annual assessment, and I think you answered this earlier, so this might just be a repeat. When you do an annual assessment, and like let's say you had an adult and a child that was 17, and they had benefits, so you would put the benefits with the adult. When you're doing the annual assessment, let's say the child is now 18, and then they receive their own benefits. Would you then place them under the child after they're 18 for annual assessments?
It's totally up to the agency. I would recommend that you would, for better record keeping and to kind of help track that a little bit better, I would recommend putting it under the child who's now 18, but it's not required that you would do that as long as they're not receiving separate services outside of that enrollment. So yeah.
There is, okay. Enter name. One more question. Sorry, Dave.
Yeah, no problem.
All right. This one's kind of, in the question of the health conditions, this is one that was actually asked a little while ago that I missed. Any health condition that's answered is yes. There is a follow-up question for indefinite condition. They're asking, how are we supposed to make that determination?
So that determination is is dependent upon documentation that the client would provide from a physician or from or a doctor or some form of a doctor that has a medical license. So if they have documentations verifying that their chronic health condition or their mental health condition is indefinite, then that's when you want to select yes. If they don't have that documentation at all, and it has not been verified, then you do not want to say yes, that it's indefinite, because the only person that can, unless you are a certified medical professional, that can make the determination, and you can document it within their file, then you would want to select yes. But if there is no documentation, you do not want to select yes as an indefinite. Mm-hmm.
So the basic point is people can recover from mental health and substance use disorder. So you don't want to answer this kind of willy-nilly, like it needs to be an actual indefinite yes from a medical provider, right?
Correct. That is correct. Mm-hmm.
I think that is it for now.
Okay. And what we'll do is we will also we'll make sure to copy all these questions and answers and put a document on the website, the Pennsylvania COC website, for frequently asked questions during this webinar as well. All right, so we've gone through login procedures, Workspace Carousel, and how that functions, and that's this, the home workspace, the client workspace. And I just want to be specific when we talk about what we've gone through in the client workspace, is each program that's operated at your agency is unique to the program funding requirements. So if your organization gets ESG, HAP, CFC, PATH, SSVF, let's just say you get all those funding streams, the program is actually attached to a specific funding grant that then will carry over the required questions that are needed to be answered for that. And there are separate guides under the system documents that shows you the data collection process or procedures. You can also reference the HMIS Data Standards Manual, which is posted to the Pennsylvania COC website under the HMIS page. Come on. So you have the HMIS data manual and then the data dictionary. And under the data manual, it actually separates out the specific funding streams, whether it's RI, PATH, COC, SSVF, and so on and so forth. So that is broken out already. Again, remembering to, and actually, I don't know if I did share this, but I do want to remind you folks that the ones that you want to add as favorites that we get all the time, is people are like, where can I find this? Where can I find that? Is your project enrollments and your assessments. Oh, and your most important one, it's somewhat very rare, but people do enroll services, and it is important to share that. So if you are using and enrolling clients into services, you do want to hover over project enrollments, go to enrolled services, and I will save this under here as a favorite to show you that. And you'll want to add a new service or add a household service. So if it's a family and they're all together, you do add household service. If it's individual, you do individual. Since we were working with the family, I'll go ahead and say add household service. And let's go back a year. And let's just say on the 20th, they started the service for that permanent supportive housing program. You want to make sure that in order to create a service, the most important thing that you need to ensure is that you create the project enrollment first. If you do not create the project enrollment, you will not get this option to select the project enrollment to create the service. So it is very important that the project enrollment gets created first so that you can select the project enrollment, because then it will populate the services that are attached to that specific grant, where then you will select the service that they had received. And these services are specific to the funding sources that are associated to the funding opportunity under that project. Let's just say housing placement. You also have the option to say how long the time, how long you did it for. Let's say you spent 2 hours with the family at $20 an hour. So you spent a total of $40. Who performed the service? You can add any service notes and who it was associated to, and then you can click save. Oh, well, one other thing. If you want to say you provided a service at a specific location, you can say that. If not, and it was like you met them at the facility that they were at, you can click save, and it will then save that service in there for that time period. Moving on to the next section, which is your provider workspace. That provider workspace is primarily where you're going to find your, if you're on the east, your community queue for coordinated entry. And if you're on the west, you're going to see your prioritization list. And you'll find it under Western prioritization list or Eastern community queue. What I did was, again, I saved it as a favorite so I can go directly to it, and then you can sort and pull it up and so on and so forth. You want to make sure that if you are functioning as, if you are overseeing multiple programs or multiple agencies, you want to make sure that you have the correct provider for accessing it. For example, this one organization I'm under has 2 different providers, so you want to make sure you double click or click on the actual agency, load that, so then you can get the most appropriate referrals associated to that as well. So under provider management, you can select if your agency accepts referrals through the coordinated entry process. This is where you'll find your referrals as well. And I'm actually going to reload that previous one so that we can look. I can just quickly show you how a referral would be accepted. However, there is a separate training for that. You would come down here. It shows you your incoming referrals, your pending, canceled, and accepted referrals. And you would, again, follow the procedures outlined in the process to accept or reject the referral. And you would update and acknowledge that information. There's also reports that you can pull for your, based off of referrals or your prioritization list. Oh, it loaded. So you have the East has the community queue, the West has the Western prioritization list, and as you notice, both have the ability to pull your summary reports that will show you overall where the standings are, and what the data looks like, and so on and so forth for that. And then the next one is your housing workspace, which is, I don't want to get into too much detail because there is going to be a separate training, and I'll make sure to get the registration out as soon as possible, either today or tomorrow. because we want to go over the housing inventory management and usage and setup prior to the point in time occurring. Not saying it's going to be a requirement that we use that as the point as pulling the housing inventory chart this year, but in the future, we want to make sure that, especially when coordinated entry kicks off, we want to make sure that all housing providers are utilizing their housing inventory in the system so that we can get as close to a real-time availability as possible, so that when referrals are sent or when agencies are looking for places for people to go, we can refer to a housing inventory to see what's available and what it looks like in terms of beds and units and so on and so forth. So, and that's what that is for. And at any time, if I were to go back to client workspace, let's say I had a problem with I want to load this for a second. Let's say I had a problem with the service, and let's say it wasn't populating for some reason. I can come up here to help. I can report an issue, ask a question, make a suggestion, or you can view documents or system administration guides. But primarily you want to use either report, ask, or make a suggestion. And by clicking on one of those, you could say service, transaction, not working. And then you would put in your text. The reason why I'm saying please see the section attached, because what we can do, what gets sent to the help desk is this debugged report that we can read and look into the query to see what went wrong with that section. I mean, you can look in it, you can see what it is, but once you send it, we'll look into it and get back to you as soon as possible. It then sends it off from the system. And then an email alert comes in to the help desk. And then you can also come up here to the workspace to come over here to support, and you can track your open cases that you submit. And you can kind of look into it, add to it, and see if you can add a note if you want to add more information, or whether you were in it and you're like, "Oop, made a mistake. It actually was fixed," or you can close it, and so on and so forth. So, other than that, that is all we have today on the basic entry. Besides the fact of having the, upcoming training this Monday on privacy and security. On excuse me, January 8th on privacy and security training, which we recommend that everybody attend. And if you can't attend, we are recording that, so that will be available from 1 to, no. There it 10 to 11, I believe. Again, we'll send out reminders for that as well. And then we're going to do the housing inventory training that we're putting together now, as well as the report training that will be coming out. So look for 2 registration links coming out that you can attend. Brian, do we have any further questions?
Let me check. And just to let you know, I don't know what you have after this, but Michelle Baxter from PATH, she has a couple questions to go over because with the PATH program. So what we can do is unmute her, and we can kind of try to cover some of her questions once we're done with the.
Yeah, that'll be fine.
Is that? Do you have time to do? Okay, great.
Yep, that'll be fine.
Okay. So Michelle, I'll get you unmuted, and we can do that as soon as we wrap up any other questions here. And I'm looking through, and I don't think I see any questions we haven't answered.
Okay. All right. Well, what we'll do is we'll get this recording downloaded as soon as we're done, as well as get the additional registration out for those 2 other trainings on housing inventory and report training. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.